Hello and welcome to the Somerset Archaeological and Natural History Society, which is usually known as SANHS. My name's Lizzie Induni and I'm the chair of SANHS. This evening, John Page will be talking about Rowland Pavey. John is a long-standing member of SANHS, having joined the society way back in the 1970s as part of the Historic Building Committee. He's later joined the Library Committee and the Local History Committee, which he's now chair of and has been chairing for the last 20 years. John's a really busy person. He represents SANHS on the Axbridge Town Trust and has done that for 20 years. And he's also chaired the Axbridge Museum, which is situated in King John's Hunting Lodge. He's a founding member of the Banwell Heritage Group and acts as the treasurer for his local village hall committee. As well as all this, he gives talks to organisations in Somerset, North Somerset, Bristol and South Gloucester, and writes local history articles for his local village newsletter. He's also published some books and articles. He's a very busy person indeed. As usual, John will take questions at the end of the talk. To ask questions, you'll need to activate your chat button at the bottom of the page and type in a question. If the button's not there, at the bottom of the page, it might be at the top or even hidden under 3 dots. Because we're recording this webinar, we won't use any names in the chat at the end of the webinar. It's free to register for the talks, but a donation of £5 towards the ongoing costs of SANHS would be greatly appreciated. The donations button is on the SANHS website donations page. When donating, please label your donation Pavey. To make things easier, a link to the donations page will also be posted on the chat button at the end of the lecture. So, over to John.
Thank you very much. And let's just get my screen up on here. And what are we doing? Start my slideshow. So, this talk is about someone whose life had a major impact on Cheddar, particularly, of course, in that part of it which is best known, the Cheddar Gorge. He's probably a bit less well known than George Cox or Richard Gough, who discovered the major caves there. But Jacob's Ladder, which is shown here, is obviously his main legacy that is known today. He's known as Rowland Pavey, and many people have referred to him as a Cheddar eccentric. We'll see later on why that is. He was born in Rodney Stoke, and Rodney Stoke is one of those thankful villages. There are 9 of them in Somerset out of a total of 53, but that's actually nothing to do with the fact that Rowland Pavey was born there. It's more to do with the First World War, where everybody who went to the war came back again afterwards. So that's but that's where he was born on there. And what I've got down the bottom here is something from the 1871 census, which is the first one in which he is mentioned, living with his father, Thomas Pavey, and Sarah Pavey, his mother, who has a shop there. His grandfather, in fact, was from what it was now, butcher, and then his father there was started as an agricultural labourer, but then came a shopkeeper and a deputy overseas contractor of 2 acres, whatever that means. Unfortunately, in some of the census, it's a bit difficult to work these things out at times. By 1881, his father had become a farmer and a miller in a grist mill in Cheddar Gorge, which is shown here. Rowland is there now, and he's 15 years old at this time. So he's got 2 sisters, Sarah and Caroline, and a 29-year-old cousin who's helping his father. He did actually, when he was young, seem to like doing a lot of bicycle racing. There's many references to him in the newspapers. Not terribly sure that he was very good at it, to be honest. In fact, he is, as you can see from this one on here, he has a handicap, which is quite a large handicap, but still manages to lose the race. And in most races, he seemed to do the same, have one of the largest handicaps and come in just about at the end. But anyway, in the 1891, he is actually referenced here. He's taken over the mill now from his father, and he is married with a wife called Lottie, and he's got one newborn child there who is still only a few months old. But notably here, he's not only referring to himself as a miller, but also as a cavern explorer. Here in 1901, he's a miller in a grist mill, and the caving is not mentioned on there for some reason. I'm not quite sure, or for any of his other interests, as we shall see later, he has a number of others. This actually is showing the difference between the mill originally there and as it is today, on the right-hand side there. So the wall round it is very similar to the wall that was there originally, but the waterboard actually got rid when they purchased this area of the mill. And now what we've got there is a rotary sensor garden, which is a place specifically designed to enable people with disabilities to enjoy nature. Here we are. In 1911, he now refers to himself as a miller, a hotel keeper, temperance hotel, of course, and water finder. Actually, Cheddar had two temperance hotels, another one actually near the Market Cross, next door to where the library has been for years. The water finder is something I'm not quite sure why that didn't get mentioned before, because he had been doing quite a bit of that, and we will come back to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. In 1921, which is the latest census that we have available to us nowadays, he's a miller and hotel keeper. Again, a temperance hotel on there. As you can possibly see from this, there's original parts that were written in on here, but then other people have written in pencil around it on there, and I'm not quite sure what all that is in connection with there. But anyway, he's now actually got a couple of assistants down there. His daughters are assisting in the business as well. We'll come back to that again later on. Some of the things, going back a little bit to the 1880s, he's actually, when he was a young man, one or two little problems. Well, I say a young man, he's 20 years old at this time, was accused of maliciously killing a cat, which he complained was always trespassing on a rabbit warren. So he shot it. And then he tried to prove an alibi, but the magistrate didn't believe him. So he is fined, and he had to pay 7 and 6pence for the cat, although the owner had said that it was worth £1. This is sort of followed up with another one here where he's game trespassing. So on somebody else's land, he pretends that he was on different grounds from the ones described, but the witness actually chased him off the land. And obviously, again, he was decided that he actually wasn't telling the truth on here, because he was fined 10 shillings with costs. Then there's another interesting case, which is from 1887, so roughly the same period of time, where obviously there was a sale on locally in Cheddar Gorge, I believe it was, and he was accused of a theft of a walnut loo table, similar to that one that's shown down the bottom, if you're not quite sure what a loo table is. He actually purchased a dining room suite at the sale, and they were then delivered to him. That was on the next day they were delivered to him. They had discovered in the evening that the loo table was missing. And they actually saw it in his house. Well, he actually didn't deny that he'd got it, but he said it was thrown in with the deal. Exactly what happened in the court case, you can only see from what the newspaper says on here, but the judge couldn't make up his mind exactly who was telling the truth in this case, so the prisoner got the benefit of the doubt. In this case, that was Pavey, and the judge said that if they wanted to check on the current ownership of that, they've got to sue him in the county court. As far as I know, that didn't happen, but interesting sort of cases. Here again, 1894, he's maliciously maiming and wounding a fowl. And the bit here that's the interesting bit is that he's saying that they're always picking up Bix along the roadside, and he throws a stone at him, and he says whether the bird flew up against the stone he could not say, but they obviously find him again on this. So he's obviously got a little bit, his youth was a little bit, wild, shall we say. But here, I put this one in actually because this isn't anything to do with him, but the age-old problem of fireworks going off, in this particular case in the gorge, and it so frightened a horse that it dropped dead from fright on there. This was an odd fellow's fate on there. Actually, this rang a bell with me because I did actually have my dog with me at one time above Cheddar Gorge, and when I was actually there, somebody let off a firework in the gorge and the dog disappeared and ran all the way home without me knowing where he was, across major roads and all the rest of it, but luckily did get there. Anyway, that one isn't anything to do with him. Here's a picture of him, and as you can see, he's quite a well-attired sort of gentleman there, and again showing the mill as it was at the time when roughly when he was actually running it. Now, before I actually start on exactly what he was doing on the cave side of things, I was just sort of showing this as to one of the reasons why he really got interested in caves, and partly that is to do with what happened in the gorge. So here in Hannah Moore, who came to Cheddar, some of you may know something about that, and she was very friendly with William Wilberforce, and this is mentioned in Mendip Annals, which is something that her sister actually wrote, and this is Martha Moore, that is, and that particular thing is saying that in the month of August 1789, William Wilberforce came to spend a few days with them in Cowslip Green, just at the bottom of the hill coming on the A38 from the airport. The cliffs of Cheddar are esteemed the greatest curiosity in this part, so we recommended Mr. Wilberforce not to quit the country till he'd spent a day in surveying these tremendous works of nature. In other words, at that time, the caves in Cheddar Gorge were not the major interest that everybody has later on. Here is a little picture that is taken in the 19th century, early 19th century. One of the things you notice here is that there's very few trees around in Cheddar Gorge at that time. In fact, actually, a neighbour of mine at one time, when I was living in Cheddar, did actually tell me that in the 1930s, he was employed, along with a number of others, by Lord Bath to actually plant trees in the gorge to make it look more picturesque. So they're suffering from the problems of that now. Anyway, the nearest cave that opened, or the earliest cave that opened nearby, was Banwell Caves in 1824. And at that time, again, there were nothing in the way of competition from Cheddar. And they were actually opened up there hoping to get the tourist trade from Weston-super-Mare. Here's an early picture from the Reverend John Skinner, who was a guy who, well, went around all over the country looking at all of the archaeology, effectively, of the country. And it mentions Sand Cave here. I'll mention that again in a moment. But the interesting thing to me on this particular picture is the house on the right-hand side down the bottom there, which is 2-story. And you'll see why I say that in a second. But also, you notice in the gorge at this time, there's quite a lot of houses. Again, no trees, but lots and lots of houses there. So quite a few people were actually living in the gorge at this time. And then in 1838, Cox's cave came along. He actually was hoping to find somewhere to put his cart, and blasted a bit into the rock and opened up in the cave in there. So that was something that he then opened up, and it became a major fee-paying thing on there. One of the other things that was going on at this time, there is an old story in about Cheddar, in which it said that a lady in the bottom left-hand corner there, a lady actually fell in love with a sailor, and that her parents didn't like that at all, and told her that she must have nothing to do with them. If she did, they would disinherit her. Well, she did actually get married to him, and they did disinherit her. Unfortunately, after they had had a child, then he ran away to sea. He was a sailor, and left her destitute. So she came to live in Cheddar. Now, Dave Irwin, an old friend of mine who was a great caver, used to live up a Priddy, he actually did some research on this, and Jack and Nancy Beecham, whose original names were probably John and Ann Weeks, actually, he is actually the son that was born to that woman. And in fact, he built a little house that you see here at the foot of the cave, which is behind them there, the entrance into it there, and they used to conduct people around in the cave. That cave later on became Gough's cave. Gough got friendly with them, and when they died, effectively, he took over, and then he started to blast into the rocks and open up more of the caves in there. And of course, that became a major fee-paying enterprise, in particular because they also found some skeletons there, which, as far as I know, is still the earliest man skeleton that has been found in this country, and is now the original is in the British Museum, although they still have one locally. So obviously this is a money-making thing, and that's something that Pavey wanted to try and find something himself so that he could make a lot of money out of it. Well, one of the things he found is Flint Jack's cave. Not easily accessible on this one. It was up quite high up on the cliff, and he had to make a path up to it and down from it on the other side, sort of thing. He did find some interesting things in there, although he didn't actually necessarily keep them all in there. Why he called it Flint Jack's cave, I've never quite understood on there, because Flint Jack was actually a guy who was working originally with an archaeologist who did find flints and so on, and sold them off to museums and various other places like that. But when he died, Flint Jack, whose actual name was Edward Simpson, actually decided that this was a great thing, and he started selling lots of them, until somebody rumbled the fact that he was actually making them himself. So he was actually, when he was found out on this, he eventually went to prison. But before he did that, he went along to a number of archaeological societies and gave demonstrations of how he did the flint napping. So quite why this is named after him, I'm not quite sure on there. Hopefully it wasn't because Pavey actually put some flints in there. I don't think that's true, but he did move them out. He moved them out to another cave that he had, which we'll mention in a moment. Here we see in the cave there are a few human skulls and animal bones discovered in there, and that's a nice little picture of some of them lying in there on the moment. Here we have Pavey's cave, and I'm not quite sure whether that's Pavey himself standing in the cave there. What I've got up on here about first shown on the Duke of York and Princess Mary's wedding day is actually taken from that little sign you can see on the right-hand side of the cave entrance there. And it says also, cave is free of charge. One of the reasons for that is because it really wasn't very much of a cave at all. And it was never really a great success. So he moved some of the stuff down from Flint Jack's cave and put in this cave, plus a small collection of china on some shelves he erected. Interestingly, there's something on there which says that, or in the Mendip Caves Registry, it says it's an artificial cave in a series of alcoves blocked off from daylight by stone walls. Some natural passage connected with Cox Cave in 1986 or around about then, when second entrance to that cave was closed. And then it is alternate names on there as Fantasy Grotto, Miss Pavey's Cave, Aquarium Cave, Cave Aquarium, Waterfall Cave. And then today, as far as I know, it is actually the escape rooms for those of you who want an adventure that particular way. But it was never really a success as a cave. But the other thing he got involved with, sorry, before I get to that, yes, this one here, he did actually try to do the same sort of thing as Gough and Cox had done before him, particularly Gough, which is actually to try and blast his way through into other caves to see if he could find a way through. A natural explosion followed when he put a match end in contact with a quantity of rock powder. And he rushed into the open air with all possible speed, sadly burnt by the explosion and torn by contact with the rocky sides of the cave. So the doctor was called, and I like this last bit there, as this is not Mr. Pavey's first experience of this kind, then hopes he will recover fairly soon. So obviously he wasn't very good at doing the blasting in there. But then before he'd actually got there, he actually had started becoming a water finder, as he tended to call it. And here is a little advert that he got. He will find the spring of water. He will tell how deep it is to the water. He will show you the strongest spring on your land, and he'll give you any other information on water. Hopefully he does actually say that his father used to use a hazel twig to successfully find water, and that he couldn't operate it very well to start off with, but his father actually persevered and taught him how to do it. Then he used to start trying it out behind the Temperance Hotel that we mentioned before, on the hillside there, and he started to try and teach other people how to do it. In fact, he spent so much time doing that, his father complained that he was neglecting the mill business in favor of that old hole. So then he locked up the cave to devote himself to the mill. And then when he went back to the cave a little while later, remember I told you he bought a number of things in there to enhance it, he found that most of the valuable items had actually been stolen. So that's a bit of a shame there. But here he is as a water diviner on here. This is actually an example of where it's in the newspaper saying how good he was. he was carefully looking over the ground without the aid of a twig, as commonly used by others. And he discovered the strongest spring in the immediate vicinity by merely looking at the ground. So then he was asked how deep it was, and then he said, oh, depth of 24 feet. And apparently within 6 inches of that, they came to a very strong spring. So some really good publicity for him there. And 9 foot of water found in the well there. So that was really good on there. Here's another advert, the West of England Advertiser. He's a professional water finder, and it's never failed in the finding of water. I'm not quite sure why anything from a joint to a cavern there, but it's still talking about the depth and the yield estimated on there, and no water, no pay. Here, I put this one in as well, because if you look at the heading on this one, this is the Forres Elgin and Nairn Gazette. So he's advertising not just locally in Somerset and Bristol area, but really right up north. The Northern Review and Advertiser, this is called, and never failed on there. Send for testimonials. So it's obviously getting around the whole country on his water divining. But Professor Wertheimer, who was the principal in what is Merchant Venturers Technical College, but has now become the Cottam School nowadays, he actually in 1905 was very suspicious of all this water divining, and so he set up a challenge on there. And this particular challenge you can find actually mentioned in papers all over the country. So at this time, Rowland Pavey became very well known, not necessarily for all the right reasons, as we shall see. But anyway, he was going to test 3 professional water finders and 3 amateurs to test how they actually got on together. And here he had 28 experiments, but he divided them up into a half dozen classes. So can they find wells or water channels leading to them? Whether the diviner's rod is due to an electrical cause, so he would try and stop the electrics to see whether there was any electrical causes there. Could they find an underground channel? Could they compare with other different diviners on the same spots? Discovering when water is or not flowing in a pipe. We'll come back to that one in a bit more detail in a minute. And also not just water divining, but a lot of course, diviners actually detected metal. So finding gold or silver was important there. So 3 professionals were actually included, a man called Shennels and Roberts, and then R. Pavey there in the middle. And then 3 amateurs, Sir Richard Harrington, the Reverend Newman, and Miss E.M.H. Whether E.M.H. there is related to Harrington or not, I'm not quite sure, but I assume that they are all friends of the professor in one way or another. Why the woman has to be anonymous, I'm not quite sure there. But anyway, so this was a test. And on the left there, that picture that we've got there with the rod is actually taken from the book that I'll be mentioning again in a moment. Now, Pavey said he could detect water flowing through an iron pipe where it was regulated, and he managed to get it correct 4 out of 10 attempts, apparently. But Wertheimer also got 8 local students just to come along and guess, and they managed 4 out of 10 as well. So it didn't bode too well for Pavey. And Wertheimer concluded that the motions of the divining rod and his they are not connected with any cause outside the person, and that in fact it's subjective on there. And we'll come back to that sort of thing again in a moment. So 9 years later, or sorry, 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, he wrote this book here, There's not many copies of this around at the moment, but I do happen to have a copy here of my own. And that one is a water finding, the sublimated faculty, which is how he referred to it on there, or the pantoscopic faculty, as he liked to call it. Pantoscopic just means having a wide range of vision. That's how Pavey always referred to things there. And you can see on the contents on here, he talks about that sublimated faculty on there, how he discerns magnetic waves, human wings discerned. We'll come back to that one. And then the author's early experience, how the water rods are used, and then some practical expositions and some more experiments to try and counteract what the professor had actually done on there. And of course, there's a report of the professors in here, so we can compare the things on there and we can see exactly what actually happened there. Here we are. He's using the rod to start off with, but then he found that he didn't need to use that, so he would just use his hands and feel his way along for there. He would get the feeling in his body on that. These his drawings, by the way, from his book. And here, as you can see, he would trace lines out, magnetic lines, so he could feel these magnetic indicators on there. Actually, Wertheimer did actually comment on this, that anyone would have a good chance of making at least one line pass through the world to be detected if you're doing all those magnetic lines. But anyway, he somehow or other got into this magnetic impulse on here and said that he could find things better that way. He also did some extraordinary drawings like this particular one, ideal complexity of system. It's intended to give an idea of the colorless waves passing over the earth. I'm not quite sure whether I understand this thing. This is the electricity seen by him on there, and it's saying that gravity is seen by the pantoscopist to be the soul of all material bodies, but magnetism the form of all material bodies. If you can understand that one, perhaps you'll let me know later on, but I'm not quite sure that I understand it fully on there. Anyway, the other thing that he noticed, we mentioned human wings just now, and he could see that we do all have wings. Here he has a picture showing the type of wings that we have. And as you can see, they're very much like some of the angel wings that you get in some pictures, are a little bit larger. And if you look on his shoulder, you can see a little cross on there, which is where the wing is attached to the body. Now, this isn't just he who has these wings. Apparently, we all have the wings. And so he could see that we quite how everybody wasn't flying around, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, one of the things that then happened, and this was something that was told to me by the grandson of Richard Gough, Doug Gough. And Doug Gough actually at one time used to run a motor museum in the Gorge. If any of you of a certain age, you may remember that. It's a great shame it hasn't still got it there, because it was a lovely museum, and it was his own cars and some friends of his cars. And every now and then they used to go a little tour around the neighborhood on a day out sort of thing. And it was absolutely fantastic then. But anyway, I did have quite a few chats with him at one time. And he told me then that his grandfather, Gough, had actually put some coloured lights across the gorge, and that may be for about George V's coronation, somewhere around that sort of time. And Pavey thought, well, if we can get lights across there, perhaps actually it would be, I could show people that I could fly across. So he built himself some wings from whale bones and skins and attempted to fly with them. And he used, well, it's ivy chair or the preaching rock, which actually sometimes gets called the prating rock. And so here we have the prating rock on here, which actually Lion Rock nowadays, I think you remember it. Actually, interestingly, on this particular one, that little house down the bottom, there's a book that came out recently about George Cumberland, which has been produced by SANHS. And in there, George Cumberland says that he actually lived in that house down there for a while. It wasn't quite as precipitous, I think, as it's shown in there. But anyway, so what he was going to do is fly across from the rock there across to the other side of the gorge. Luckily from him, when he jumped off, he actually landed in some shrubs. So he did actually get quite a bit scratched and so on, but somehow he did survive. And apparently he never attempted it again. Anyway, here we do have some experiments, and on the left-hand side of your screen are some of the experiments on there, times when the water was turned on and off on there. And as you can see, this one here is actually one of the early experiments by Wertheimer, and then Mr. Pavey states on and off quite a lot on there at varying different times, which didn't seem to tally in terribly well with the turning on and off. What they would do is they would have all this long pipe, and they would have somebody who was hidden away so that they couldn't see him and he couldn't see them. And they would turn the water on and off and note down what times they had been doing that. And he was told to find out when the water was flowing through the pipe. So as you can see, it's not terribly accurate on there. But apparently later on, when he actually started to do this himself, he got it rather better, more accurate on there than had happened before. Perhaps some of this is to do with Wertheimer's suggestion on there that if in fact he knew where he was and what he was doing, it's a lot easier to do these things. But I'm not quite sure how that worked with his sales around the country and his advertising all over the show. But anyway, his book is an attempt to show that what Wertheimer was suggesting wasn't accurate, and that he was in fact a lot better than Wertheimer's book or his articles suggested on there. Here is something I've taken from BBC Science Focus, and actually it's also mentioned in the New Scientist as well, something very similar. Some evidence that dowsers can find it when more traditional methods have fails, but experiments show that this works only when the dowser has some unconscious knowledge of where the target is. And they suggest, for example, they might be using clues from vegetation, geography, temperature, various things like that. So they mightn't realize what they're doing and therefore think it's supernatural. And they actually then refer to the pipes being run underground, and under those controlled conditions, the dowsers don't succeed. So that actually is a rather more modern quote than some of the others, but still, I think, harping back to those experiments that were being done around about that sort of time. He wasn't only doing this sort of thing. Here we see that he was actually participating in the flower shows locally as well. This happens to be just one year I picked out on here, but he came second in the runner beans, and the pumpkin or squashy came first, and cucumbers he came first as well. So he obviously enjoyed that sort of side of things as well. Rock House. If you remember earlier on in the earliest Cheddar census one that we had, down the bottom it did actually show something about Rock House as well underneath the mill, and that was actually owned by a lady called Shippen, who was actually the widow of a Wesleyan minister. interestingly, I think she went out to Canada shortly afterwards. So that may be when, in fact, they were able, the Paveys were able to acquire their premises. And they actually set that up as a dining and tea rooms. Large room for dancing and good stabling. You'd need it in those days. So the Miss Paveys, his daughters, have had spacious and attractively fitted up bowers capable of accommodating some 400 persons. Wow, that sounds rather huge. Anyway, constructed in the grounds belonging to the premises, and this picturesque village on there, and they can cater for dinners and teas up to about 400 there. That was in 1900 that was actually put up in there. And here we are a little bit later on there, the Rock Hotel. It's actually is now mentioning as well that Jacob's Ladder has been started on there, and this advert is in 1908. I haven't been able to find any other specific thing which actually says Jacob's Ladder being opened. So obviously it's rendered easy and pleasant by Jacob's Ladder leading from the Rock House Garden, which has recently been constructed for the use of visitors. So I'm assuming 1908 is about the right time for that. And in this case, actually, down from 400, we're only talking about 150 now. But they're doing teas, luncheons, and dinners. And interestingly, they have a piano for the use of parties. They also actually notably charge anybody who brings their own provision twopence for hot water and tea things. Presumably cups and saucers and things of that sort. So that's 1908. And here we have an early picture, both of those tea rooms down the front. So on the right-hand side, there is the building on there, which is the Temperance Hotel. And the buildings on the left are, in fact, where the dining was done and so on. And here's the early form of the Jacob's Ladder going up there, with, as you can see on the left-hand side, the entrance to it very similar to that which is there today. And again, the hillside here, a few shrubs around, but not very many, mainly open up all the way up to the top on there. Now, actually, it's often said that I perhaps should have explained this one as where am I? A little bit later, I've got something else. But actually, this is Jacob's Ladder. And Jacob went up from Beersheba to Haran and stopped at a particular place at the night. This is actually taken from the authorized version of the Bible. And he takes some stones, puts them as a pillow, and goes to sleep. And dreams of a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And there are angels ascending and descending it. So presumably, if you have been up the Jacob's Ladder there, then your wings would have helped you from going up and down there as well. When he got there, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, the east, the north, the south. And in thee and thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again to this land. Some of this actually may have some relevance to some of the politics that are going out in the Middle East at the moment. But anyway, I'm not going to pursue that one. But anyway, when he wakes up, he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not there. So this is why he was taking this as Jacob's Ladder. Then it's shortly after that was published in there. So presumably shortly after Jacob's Ladder was erected on there, that the White Tower was open to the public. So as it wasn't on that picture before, I assumed that was just about earlier than August of 1908. But it's recommended on there here. It's called the White Tower at this time. It's open to the public, magnificent views, and it's up there owing to the Pavey's enterprise in erecting the ladder. And of course, as you all know, the breezes which blow over the White Tower are probably as health-giving as can be desired. And there is always the comforting reflection that a good cup of tea can be obtained at the top, ordered in advance by telephone if desired. This is 1908. That's quite something to suggest that one, I think, on there. Here is that tower up there, and one of the things he did, you can possibly see there's a little rail sort of running up the side. He had, at one time, they had a little funicular railway running up the side there. I must admit that I did actually go up Jacob's Ladder for the first time when my father came home from the war, and with his demob pay, we had a holiday in Weston-super-Mare and visited Cheddar. And I did actually, we did then go up Jacob's Ladder, and that was 1946. They then did still have the rail so that you could order teas and they would send it from the tea room down the bottom all the way up on this little funicular railway, and you could have meals that way and so on as well, and you could eat it up the top. The tower at that time, well, we'll come to that again in a moment, but as you can see, there are still some people going up and down the Jacob's Ladder at this time as well. Here is an interesting thing that in November, remember that's August that was talked about, this very conspicuous building erected on the hilltop near the entrance to the cliffs during the past summer by Mr. Rowland Pavey has apparently afforded great satisfaction to the numerous visitors to Cheddar, who largely availed themselves of its facilities for the better viewing of the surrounding country than to a section of the residents. So the residents are not very happy with it. Although regarded by those approaching the village as a welcome and useful landmark, a sustained agitation against its continuance, we understand, has at length proved successful, and instructions have just been given by the lord of the manor for its removal. So basically, he hasn't got much out of it so far. But what about this? The locals are very much against it for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. It's right up on top of the gorge, unless they actually thought that it was spoiling the view up there. But interestingly then, somebody else, possibly started by Rowland Pavey himself, I don't know, actually got up a petition to say it should stay there. And that by December here, the end of December, was still waiting to find out there whether the lord of the manor was actually happy with keeping it there. And it did stay there, so presumably no news at that time was in fact good news. But it is interesting how the local people obviously initially didn't like it. Here it was then he called it actually the Mystic Tower. And here we see the tower there with the ladder, the steps going halfway up it. And you can see that at the top right as well with somebody going up there. And it's open up at the top, so you just go up there for the views. There's the, later on, this tea house was built at the top there, quite a large area, as you can see. That actually, again, that's where they would have the food taken up for them. And then he also had the pleasure grounds, or Joyland, as it was called up there, and all these zip wires up there. In 1946, actually, if I remember rightly, there was still a zip wire up there. They weren't actually quite as common in those days as they are now, and it did seem quite popular from these pictures, although whether it's just people posing for it or not, I'm not quite sure. But But anyway, there it is. And then he's actually at the same time, around this sort of period, he's also keeping pigs somewhere, because here he is in 1908 as well, beginning of the year there. He's actually his name appears in this advert for pig food, and he's asking for that, and he confidently recommends it. Please, can you send me 500 weight? That advert seemed to appear in just about every paper in the country, as far as I can see. When I looked it up and so on, it just gave me 50 million newspapers, all seem to have the same advert in it there. So his name was getting spread around quite a lot with that one as well. And he does refer to himself in this case as Cheddar Mills, rather than anything to do with the water divining or anything like that. This is just before the Jacob's Ladder and the Rock House is open there. Sorry, not the Rock House, just there. He did actually stand for election as well. The results that we've got in here are for the district council, which would have been the Axbridge Rural District Council at that time. And then he stood for the parish council. But again, if you look right down the bottom there, you'll see he only got 36 votes, and the second fewest of anybody on there. Actually, it's always interesting to me to look down some of the names here. Openshaw, I always remember there, because when I first came to Cheddar, we lived in Barrows Croft, which had only just been built then. And I actually stopped my car there to have a look at the house when a character came up, and it's actually Openshaw, this Openshaw's son, came up, stood outside and said, "You're sitting under a juniper tree, you know." Because he planted all these trees and insisted on them being kept there. I don't think the juniper tree is still there now. Packer, I did know his son as well on there. John Scorse, whether that's the father or son, I'm not quite sure there, but John Scorse used to be the undertakers there. And I was on the council for many years with his wife, actually. So a number of people down there that either I knew them or their sons. So it's always quite interesting looking at those sorts of things. But anyway, in 1929, there was a huge storm and thunder and lightning, accompanied by torrential rainfall and a wind which reached gale force, lashed the channel into a great fury, inflicting widespread havoc to shipping. So this sort of thing isn't just this year, it's been happening before. And you may notice here that it actually affected roadside trees in Cheddar, and it facing of the Baptist Chapel vestry, and the Mystic Tower, which was actually made of wood, was blown down at that time. So that actually was a bit of a disaster there. What I have done is put down here some of the things which I haven't got the figures for this last year or so to see actually how it compares to this. But as you can see, 1929 to January 30, November to January there is actually the most precipitation of any year from then right up to date on there. And it was obviously a horrible year. So we lost the... But they actually rebuilt the tower. Now, this is actually what it looks like today. But when they rebuilt it, it was originally clad. So this is the superstructure. I think they actually have modified this a little bit, but basically it was clad on there at the time. And so when I came in 1946, I did actually climb up there. And one of the things that was interesting on there is that they actually had, they had some wonderful equipment up at the top there as well. And I've lost my place in the charts here a little bit. Oh yes, a camera obscura, that's the word I was thinking of. It had a camera obscura at the top, In fact, somebody was writing a book about this and asked me about it. And I said there was one there, and he said, no, there was never anything there. They were out of date by then anyway. But then later on, he came back to me and said, oh dear, actually, you were right after all. And I knew I was right anyway, because I remember seeing it there and reflecting on there. I also remember that, in fact, we got halfway down the steps again and suddenly couldn't find my sister. So I was sent back to find her again, and she'd sneaked up the top of the tower for another look. But anyway, that's by the by. So the tower is still there. Not quite in the format that he had it, but basically the same sort of shape on there as it is today. And they did try a little while ago to actually stop the name Jacob's Ladder, because they said that, in fact, nobody nowadays knows what Jacob's Ladder is all about, the going up to heaven and such, like the dream. So they were going to call it the 274 steps. Luckily, that seems to have died fairly quickly, and we still call it Jacob's Ladder today. Actually, I think that Muslims actually use the Old Testament as well, so they probably know quite a bit about Jacob's Ladder as well. So there are quite a lot of people that do. One of the other things that was an interesting thing there is that for a time, La Louis, a palm reader, was actually had a little place, as you can see, the hut at the bottom of the steps today. It was actually where she practiced her palm reading in the old days there. And what she used to do is wait inside the hut there, and when anybody came along, she would suddenly pop out and say, oh, hello. And they often wondered how it was that she knew that they had just come up the steps there. And the answer to that was that there was a creaky step there, which she was listening for. And when that creaked a little bit, she'd jump out and so on. But anyway, she was there. It's actually, I think, used for information office nowadays. But again, one of the things you can see there as well is that in some places like here, they have started to chop down some of the trees that were on the hillside there, although there's still quite a few of them at the top there. But there's still a lot of grass there and so on. It isn't the raw rock that used to be there, unfortunately. The Temperance Hotel is still there today. Down the bottom, I showed you that it has, in fact, a dual roof on there originally, but the front half of it got knocked down because they wanted to widen the road there. And so the back half of it is still available and is now a Christmas shop. And obviously, they were still doing food and so on during the war. Because here we have a thing where Mrs. Pavey was fine, but I must admit that if you read the articles about this, it does actually say the suppliers to her were actually had a regular thing with Mr. Pavey, and she obviously was helping to collect this stuff and so on and so forth in this particular case. But she was breaching the regulations on there because she's getting meat without an official order and not keeping a proper record of all the meals. And presumably it wasn't just meat, groceries and so on as well, because a butcher and a grocer were also prosecuted for supplying her. She got fined quite a bit on there. They got fined rather less, but that's that, one of those things that in the wartime, of course, with all the rationing and so on, she was complaining that they needed the food for all the visitors that they were getting, and they hadn't got enough. But that didn't wash with the regulators there, I'm afraid. So here we are. Both of them died 1944, a couple of years before I came first to Cheddar. He died in March and she died in August on there. Both of them are remembered basically as the building of Jacob's Ladder rather than anything else there. Gough did actually say to me he was a lovely old character, but he also noted that he was a bit of a picturesque type of old character. So here we were. He had a gristmill. He spent a lot of time trying to find new caves. He did actually find one that was actually a bit more up on the hill and out of the gorge, which actually was a bit more interesting than the other two that he found. But unfortunately, that wasn't anywhere near where it could be exploited for travellers. But it is noted in some of the records on there. So he was water diviner, he had the tea house, he had the Temperance Hotel, and he erected Jacob's Ladder. So quite a bloke.
That was wonderful, John. Thank you very much indeed. So, gosh, that's leaving me rather stunned, actually, thinking about that person. Quite an eccentric person then, wasn't he?
He was definitely an eccentric, yes, I think we can say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, quite infamous in Cheddar, I should think.
Well, actually, he's not quite so well known. They do actually have one or two things that refer to Pavey as this, that, and the other, but most people don't really understand, anything about him as such. Very few people nowadays understand much about him, unfortunately. And that's one of the reasons why I thought it was good to put him on the record, because
absolutely, yeah.
It is a varied life.
I love the idea of the funicular railway going up the side there. What was it powered by?
It was a little electric cable, actually, that took it up there. It seemed to work extremely well. As I say, we actually had some food that was delivered up from below when we were there. I mean, seeing that on there, we just had to have a go at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most people did.
Was your tea still hot by the time you got it?
It was all right, actually. Yes, it wasn't. Because it didn't take that long to get up there, and they insulated things and so on to go. And you had a lid over the food and things like that and so on. But yeah, it seemed to work quite well.
Oh, absolutely fantastic! How long did it survive for? Do you know?
I haven't got I don't know exactly on that one. I don't think it lasted too much longer. I'm probably coming down in 1946. I was probably lucky to see it then in the same way as the camera obscura probably went fairly soon after with that one. I don't know when that one went.
Well, that would be just after he died then, wouldn't it? And there wouldn't be the interest there anymore.
Well, could well be, yes. But I mean, they used to have a sort of table inside the tower as well. So the camera obscura would shine the local countryside onto the table. And so you could actually have a look at all the things around on the table there. It was quite fascinating, actually.
Oh, yeah. There used to be one up next to Brunel's Bridge in Bristol. I don't know whether it's still there. But
there is one, actually. There is one still up in Bristol somewhere, actually, I think. Yes. Yeah.
All good fun. So, questions coming in now. Why did Pavey choose to name his staircase Jacob's Ladder after the version in the Bible? Was he particularly involved in the local church, or was it just that Jacob's Ladder was more public conscious by then?
No, he was very religious, actually, and so on as well. And of course, you might guess on there, I think he was actually Methodist, if I remember rightly, and that ties in as well with the Temperance Hotel.
Ah, yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, there were actually, as I said, two Temperance Hotels in Cheddar, because there was another one that was next door to the library. And in fact, that one, I still remember that as a Temperance Hotel when I first went to Cheddar in the beginning of the 70s.
Interesting. So I was quite interested in your picture of the tea rooms, and I was wondering, do you remember what it was built out of?
No, that actually they actually weren't using the tea rooms. If I can't remember the tea rooms as that, I think they were doing it out of the hotel rather than the tea rooms when I went there in 46.
Right.
I certainly don't remember those anyway on there as to whether they were a bit of a shack, I think, rather than that they look a bit like that, don't they?
But they do look.
They reckon they could, well, 400 people to start off with, and then it was down to 150 a bit later, which I think was a bit more realistic. But even then, 150 is still quite a big place
It
to
is.
accommodate
Yeah.
people. Yeah, yeah,
Brilliant.
absolutely.
Somebody here says that it feels like Pavey's colourful life would make a good stage play or a film. Has anybody ever attempted to do that?
Not to my knowledge, actually.
No.
No, it's yes. I mean, this is one of those things that it could be a really interesting one to sort of write up, and as you say, a television thing would be really quite fantastic, wouldn't it? They'd love that. Yeah.
One question here: are any of Edward Simpson's reproduction flints still around? And if so, are they now considered archaeological artifacts in their own right? Good question, isn't it?
Actually, the thing is that there almost certainly are, but people don't know because they're not sure whether they were true flints or whether they were his flints. It
It's
was
not
known that
something
he
you can
was
kind of dendrodate, is it?
exactly. So probably there are still some on display in museums around the country, and people just don't know that.
Yeah.
So we can't answer the question as such because nobody knows whether they're there or not.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I was very interested in the number of sort of bits of skull and bone that were found inside some of these caves. And I just
Yes.
wondered, might you know how many of those might have made it through to a museum? Probably quite unlikely.
I don't know exactly how many of those. No, I mean, certainly he found some bones and that sort of thing. They weren't quite as old as the ones in Gough's cave and so on. Those are still the oldest ones. But yes, there have been a number. I mean, around in the caves in Cheddar, there were, because probably people were living in the caves cavemen in the old days, and so some of them would have died there and that sort of thing. So yes, it would have been a good place for exactly those sorts of things. And there's quite a few Paleolithic ones, sort of thing. But exactly where they all are and so on, I don't know that anybody has actually done that one yet. If anybody has done it, would probably have been someone like Dave Irwin, who he used to like to get down to details like that. Quite character was Dave.
Wonderful. Well, John, I think that's coming to the end of our questions now. Thank you so much for giving us such an interesting lecture. It sounds like Cheddar was quite an interesting place back in the day. Well, it still is, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Smashing. So thank you very much. And we'll be able to hopefully hear this on YouTube soon if you've missed it tonight. Okay, moving on. That is probably going to be one of our last webinars for the season, and we'll be hopefully bringing some more webinars to you in the autumn. Meanwhile, at SANHS, we have some quite a lot of summer events coming up. Next on this, actually, what have we got here? This Saturday, there's going to be a dragonfly spotting at Priddy Pond, and that will be at 11 o'clock. No, 10 o'clock. And on the 22nd of June, there will be a visit to Hornblotton Church and Alford Church with Julian Orbach. And for people who know Julian, he helped write the Pevsner for West Somerset. And on the 29th of June, there will be a tour of Taunton Castle. That'll be at 2 o'clock. For details of all these events, please go and have a look at the SANHS website. Our associated societies have some news coming up as well. Wells Natural History and Archaeological Society is giving a walking tour of the city, and that will be on the 6th of June. That's today. And so you may have missed that because it was this morning. North Sedgemoor Local History Group are having a public opening of the Somerset Central Railway to Highbridge Wharf, which sounds jolly interesting. And that will be on the 12th of June. And The Yeovil Archaeological and Local History Society are having a visit to Sherborne Museum Textile Collection, and that will be on Monday the 24th of June, and that will be in the morning. And the last one, Harptrees History Society, Mendip Hospital Cemetery, a guided walk and exhibition, and that will be on Wednesday, the 26th of June. So quite a lot of things going on around in Somerset for you at the moment. For details of all these events, please go and look at the SANHS website. So there we go. That all that remains is for me to thank the webinar team who worked very hard this evening, Nathanael, Allan and Tony. And thank you for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you all in the autumn. Thank you and goodbye.